Democrat from Massachusetts, with us on the late edition of Balance of Power yesterday. Nonetheless, you can put the countdown clock up because the reciprocal tariffs, the president says, are taking effect at midnight. It's anyone's guess what happens after that, with now, according to the Treasury Secretary, 70 countries reaching out for negotiations. You know, we live here inside the terminal. If you're with us on YouTube, you see this backdrop. Just imagine us inside the terminal. It's almost like the severed floor. Only subscribers can get in. But Nathan Dean is our window to the world. He actually has the line to the outside. Clients who are calling in with questions, with concerns, with fears. There's only one guy you call here. Bloomberg Intelligence senior U.S. policy analyst, if you want to really know what's happening. His name is Nathan Dean. It's great to see you, sir.
Thanks again for having me.
The phone's not stopped ringing. What is the real concern here? Markets are up today. I know we're feeling pretty good about things, but these tariffs are still kicking in at midnight. Nothing's really changed.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest question we're getting from clients at the moment is, will President Trump reverse his policy? And I think if anybody's watching the Senate Finance Committee hearing this morning, the answer is most likely not. Mm-hmm. The U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer was very adamant that this is a long-term plan. The long-term gain for short-term pain is what he was saying. And so we do think these tariffs are going to go in, but we always put it with the asterisk of President Trump loves to negotiate. And even in that same committee hearing, Ambassador Greer was saying, we're working with 50 countries at the moment, 50 countries that we're working on trade deals. And I think that's what the market is really looking for. And we saw some, lawmakers from the Republican side say that as well is, look, we need some sort of end game here. You need to tell us where this is going. What is the plan? Mm-hmm. And I think that plan starts with trade deals. So I wouldn't be surprised if these tariffs go into fruition, but I also wouldn't be surprised if you see a trade deal emerge over the next day or two, if not sooner.
Yeah. Jamieson Greer, USTR, sitting for a hearing, actually 2 days worth of hearings, first day in the Senate today. Let's listen to what he had to say about these countries we're dealing with, because it doesn't sound like we're about to make deals when you listen to Mr. Greer. Here we go.
The president has been clear, again, that he's not doing exemptions or exceptions in the near term. My own sense is, given the tariff differentials between Asia and Western Hemisphere, I think people can start making decisions based on that.
So when you hear no exemptions, why are we talking to 50 countries? Doesn't that sound like 50 exemptions coming?
Well, I mean, and I would also just put his comments in the greater context of, the Trump administration where, he's not just the only person. And remember, it is President Trump at the end of the day who decides what the policy is. And there could be exemptions. It's very hard for the U.S. Trade Representative to combat Apple and Tim Cook if Apple and Tim Cook were to go into the White House and ask for an exemption. Look, I'm not saying there will be exemptions, but it's just difficult when there's other things here to play.
Sure.
But I would also point out is that, when it comes to these negotiations and so forth, there's going to be ramping up political pressure from the Republican side if we begin to see this impacted at the consumer level. Mm-hmm. Senator Tom Tillis, up for re-election in 2026, had some fairly strong language for Jamieson Greer in that hearing.
Yes.
And I'm paraphrasing here and said, who am I going to hurt if... if this turns out wrong, obviously we don't think the Republicans are going to push back on the Trump agenda right now. But if this continues over the next few months, you may see more and more Republicans coming that way.
We wrote that up. It's on the terminal. Tom Tillis, whose throat do I get to choke if this turns out to be wrong? Republican, North Carolina. Is he just trying to get tape on himself to be caught saying this at the right time if this does, in fact, go south?
Yeah, I think a little bit of this is political. I mean, obviously, we saw bipartisan legislation last week from Senator Grassley, Iowa, farm state, very important for farmers and ranchers, teaming up with Senator Maria Cantwell, that would bring back the authority of a president to impose tariffs and put it back in the congressional side.
Yep.
Now, that's not going to go anywhere. I don't think the Republican leadership has any desire to touch it, and President Trump said that he was going to veto it. But, it did get a couple of bipartisan supporters, and I think if this trade war were to continue over the next few months, you could probably get a little bit more and more, because ultimately, and this is where we feel, is that we don't think President Trump is going to respond to Wall Street. Jamieson Greer said the exact same thing today, that Wall Street's not going to dictate this outcome here. But if the consumer confidence levels and things for food and Apple electronics and other things begin to go up dramatically, then you potentially could see much more Republican pushback.
You start wondering if the real trade war is happening inside the White House now. This stuff between Peter Navarro and Elon Musk is wild. I can't even read the tweets on the air. That's how chippy that got this morning. So clearly, not everyone agrees, even inside the White House, inside the administration on this, making you wonder how fluid this whole conversation is and whether it complicates what's happening on Capitol Hill. The Speaker wants to get a vote by tomorrow, I understand, on this this framework here, the budget plan that passed the Senate. Donald Trump takes to Truth Social again. The House must pass this budget resolution, and quickly. There are a lot of Republicans in the House who are not prepared to vote yes on this.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if this takes a little bit more time. I mean, tomorrow is pretty pretty
ambitious.
Quick. Yeah, ambitious. That's the perfect word here. But what I would say is that I do think Speaker Johnson, and we also heard this from Representative Jim Jordan, when they're going around telling their members, look, this is just a blueprint. This is just to keep the process rolling.
Yes, right.
I think that's easy for Republicans to eventually grasp on and say, look, rather than incur President Trump's wrath right now, let's save it for when we actually have specifics. And so when things like SNAP, the Inflation Reduction Act, Medicaid, when those cuts potentially come up, then we'll actually fight. But for us, we think the process will continue. And ultimately, we think the Senate plan is the one that Congress is going to gear towards, because if the current baseline policy, meaning this $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, you effectively are free or the cost of zero, then you don't have to cut SNAP. You don't have to cut the IRA. You don't have to cut Medicaid. You can essentially just have to deal with deficit hawks at that point. And I think it's much easier for President Trump to go down to Capitol Hill and say, look, are you going to derail my plan? Because if so, let's talk about it now, and I'll make sure that Elon Musk and everybody else in the world is aware of it.
That's right, and he'll be tweeting, Elon, that is. They're actually going to be at the White House, a half an hour from now. There's a meeting, Republicans from Capitol Hill talking to Donald Trump about this. So let the public pressure begin. We're out of time. Has Wall Street ever thought worse of Washington than right now at this moment?
I'm not sure Wall Street has many views on, or they have many views on Washington.
Not very good ones, though. I mean, the calls you're getting, people sound desperate, right? They're angry. They want to know what the problem is in the federal city.
All they want is clarity. That's it.
See if we can ever find it. With the help of Nathan Dean. Great to see you, as always. Bloomberg Intelligence, find him on the terminal and online. Senior U.S. policy analyst. If you're a client, give him a call. In the meantime, we'll assemble our panel. Rick Davis and Kristen Hahn are straight ahead with a Supreme Court ruling today and tariffs about to take effect at midnight. We've got a lot to talk about. The fastest show in politics on Bloomberg.